The morning sun painted the Rocky Mountain foothills in shades of amber and gold, but Tom Callahan felt only the bitter bite of autumn wind as he guided his weary horse down the narrow canyon trail. 3 weeks of hard riding from Kansas had brought him to this godforsaken corner of Colorado territory, where his late brother Samuel had supposedly carved out a homestead from the unforgiving wilderness. Tom's weathered hands, scarred by years of wielding both pen and pistol, gripped the reins tighter as doubt gnawed at his resolve. The war had taken everything from him: his law practice in St. Louis, his faith in justice, and nearly his sanity. When the letter arrived informing him of Samuel's death and the inheritance of a small ranch, it seemed like Providence offering him a chance at redemption. But Providence, Tom had learned, rarely came without a price written in blood. The first sign of trouble materialized through the morning mist like a nightmare-given form. At the entrance to what should have been his brother's property, 7 wooden crosses stood in grim formation, each bearing the weight of a human body suspended by thick hemp rope. The victims, 3 men and 4 women, swayed gently in the mountain breeze, their faces purple and swollen, eyes bulging in final testimony to their suffering. Tom's horse reared and whinnied in terror, sensing death's heavy presence. Fighting to control the spooked animal, Tom dismounted with practiced ease, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt Navy revolver holstered at his hip. 20 years of frontier life had taught him to trust his instincts, and every fiber of his being screamed that this was no random act of violence. Pinned to each victim's chest was a crudely carved wooden placard bearing the same message: "This land belongs to Judge Mordecai Blackwood. Trespassers will join them in hell." The metallic taste of fear coated Tom's tongue as memories of the war flooded back. Images of civilians hanging from trees, families destroyed by the merciless machinery of conflict. He had come west to escape such horrors, not to find them waiting like old friends at his brother's gate. Moving closer to examine the bodies, Tom's trained eye cataloged details with the cold efficiency of a former Union Army intelligence officer. The rope burns suggested they had been strung up alive, left to die slowly as an example. But something else caught his attention: the almost imperceptible rise and fall of chest beneath tattered clothing. "Sweet Jesus," Tom whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Some of you are still breathing." Without hesitation, he drew his knife and began cutting rope with swift, desperate strokes. The first body to drop was that of a middle-aged Mexican man, his weathered face bearing the stoic dignity of someone who had faced death without flinching. Tom caught him carefully, feeling the faint but steady pulse at his throat. One by one, Tom lowered the victims to the ground, his movements becoming more urgent as he realized that 5 of the 7 still clung to life by threads as thin as spider silk. The survivors were in terrible condition, dehydrated, beaten, and bearing the unmistakable marks of torture. But they were alive, and that was enough to ignite the ember of purpose that had been slowly dying in Tom's chest. As he worked to revive them with water from his canteen and what little medical knowledge he possessed, Tom studied the faces of those he had saved. There was Miguel Santos, the Mexican rancher whose calloused hands spoke of honest labor. Beside him lay Rebecca Morrison, a schoolteacher from back east whose delicate features couldn't hide the steel in her gray eyes. The third survivor was Jacob Mueller, a German immigrant whose massive frame suggested he could wrestle a bear and win. The fourth was a young Lakota woman who went by the name Sarah Crowfeather, her traditional dress marking her as one of the few Native Americans who had tried to live peacefully among the white settlers. The final survivor was perhaps the most unexpected: a well-dressed black man in his 30s named Ezekiel Washington, whose expensive clothing and educated bearing suggested he was no ordinary drifter. As consciousness slowly returned to each of them, Tom found himself the focal point of 5 pairs of eyes that held a mixture of gratitude, suspicion, and the hard-earned wisdom of survivors. It was Rebecca who spoke first, her voice a harsh whisper damaged by the rope's cruel embrace. You're not one of Blackwood's men," she observed, studying Tom's face with the careful attention of someone who had learned that trust was a luxury that could prove fatal. "No, ma'am," Tom replied, offering her water. "Name's Thomas Callahan. My brother Samuel owned this land. I came to claim his inheritance, but it seems I've inherited more than I bargained for." Miguel Santos pushed himself into a sitting position, wincing as movement sent waves of pain through his battered body. Your brother, Samuel Callahan, he was a good man. Blackwood killed him 3 months ago, made it look like an accident. We all knew the truth, but speaking against the judge. He gestured weakly toward the remaining bodies still hanging from their crosses. Tell me about this Blackwood, Tom said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to command. What kind of man murders innocent people for a piece of land? It was Ezekiel who answered, his cultured voice at odds with his current circumstances. Judge Mordecai Blackwood isn't just a man, he's a cancer that's been eating away at this territory for 5 years. He came here after the war claiming to bring law and order, but what he really brought was a reign of terror disguised as justice. Sarah Crow Feathers spoke for the first time, her English heavily accented but crystal clear. He takes land from my people, claims we broke treaties that never existed. When we resist, he sends his riders. They burn villages, kill the old ones and children, take the young women for his pleasure. Jacob Mueller nodded grimly. Ja is same with homesteaders. He finds reasons, missed taxes, disputed claims, accusations of cattle rustling. Always he has papers to make it legal, but the papers are lies written in blood. Rebecca's eyes flashed with barely contained fury. I came here to teach children to read and write. Blackwood decided the territory didn't need educated citizens who might question his authority. He had his men burn down the schoolhouse with me inside. I barely escaped with my life. As their stories unfolded, Tom began to understand the scope of Blackwood's operation. This wasn't simple land grabbing, it was systematic terrorism designed to consolidate power and wealth in the hands of one man and his corrupt network of judges, sheriffs, and hired killers. How many men does he have? Tom asked, his military mind already calculating odds and strategies. 40, maybe 50 gun hands, Miguel replied. Plus the local sheriff and most of his deputies are on Blackwood's payroll. The territorial governor ignores complaints because Blackwood has dirt on him too. Tom looked around at his unlikely companions. A Mexican rancher, a schoolteacher, a German immigrant, a Lakota woman, and a freed slave. In civilized society, they would never have found common ground. But here, in this harsh wilderness where survival trumped social convention, they represented something powerful. The American frontier's promise that a person could be judged by character rather than circumstance. I won't lie to you, Tom said finally. If we stay here, if we try to fight Blackwood, some of us won't survive. Maybe all of us will die. But if we run, if we let him win, then Samuel and everyone else he's murdered died for nothing. Rebecca struggled to her feet, swaying slightly but managing to stand. I didn't come west to run from bullies. I've seen what happens when good people do nothing while evil flourishes. One by one, the others rose to join her, their battered bodies testament to their unbreakable spirits. In that moment, Tom realized that Providence had indeed brought him here, not to find peace but to finish a war that had been raging long before his arrival. Samuel's cabin stood like a lonely sentinel in the valley, its log walls weathered but solid, built to withstand both harsh winters and hostile visitors. As Tom and his companions approached the structure, he could see that his brother had chosen the location with a soldier's eye for defensible terrain. The cabin sat on a slight rise with clear sightlines in all directions, while a swift-running creek provided fresh water and a natural barrier on the western flank. Inside, they found evidence of Samuel's final days. The furniture was overturned, papers scattered, and bullet holes marred the eastern wall. But the structure itself was sound, and more importantly, Tom discovered his brother's carefully hidden arsenal in a concealed room beneath the kitchen floorboards. Samuel always was thorough, Tom murmured as he inventoried the weapons cache. There were rifles, shotguns, revolvers, and enough ammunition to sustain a siege. His brother had clearly been preparing for a war he hadn't lived to fight. Over the next 2 days, as his companions recovered from their ordeal, Tom fortified the cabin with the methodical precision of his military training. Windows were boarded up except for carefully positioned firing ports. The door was reinforced with iron bars, and strategically placed furniture created defensive positions throughout the interior. Miguel, despite his injuries, proved invaluable in these preparations. His knowledge of local terrain helped Tom identify potential approach routes and establish early warning positions. Blackwood's men, they are not soldiers, Miguel explained as they worked. They are bullies and murderers who rely on fear and superior numbers. In a fair fight, they would run like rabbits. Then we'll have to make sure it's not a fair fight, Tom replied grimly. Rebecca appointed herself the group's intelligence officer, her teacher's mind perfectly suited to organizing and analyzing information. She had been collecting evidence of Blackwood's crimes for months, carefully documenting murders, thefts, and corruption in a detailed journal. "Look at this pattern," she said, spreading her notes across the cabin's dining table. "Every 6 months, there's a surge in mysterious deaths and property transfers. It corresponds with the arrival of new territorial officials from back east. Blackwood waits until they're settled, then makes his move while they're still learning the territory." Ezekiel proved to be full of surprises. Despite his genteel appearance, he possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of explosives and demolition, skills he had acquired as a sapper during his service with the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. "Back in Charleston, we called it opening doors that weren't meant to be opened," he explained with a slight smile as he examined Samuel's supply of blasting powder. Sarah Crowfeather brought different skills to their unlikely alliance. Her knowledge of traditional warfare and wilderness survival was unmatched, and her ability to move through the landscape like a ghost made her an ideal scout. "My father fought beside Crazy Horse," she told Tom one evening as they planned their defense. "He taught me that sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to become the wolf that other wolves fear." Jacob Mueller, once he recovered from his injuries, revealed himself to be a craftsman of exceptional skill. Using tools from Samuel's workshop, he began constructing ingenious defensive mechanisms, spring-loaded spear traps, concealed pitfalls, and a series of interlocking barriers that could channel attackers into carefully prepared killing zones. As they worked, Tom found himself thinking about the strange turns his life had taken. 5 years ago, he had been a respected lawyer in St. Louis, married to a beautiful woman named Catherine and dreaming of a career in politics. The war had changed everything, stripping away his illusions about justice and civilization while revealing the brutal realities that lurked beneath society's polite veneer. Catherine had left him when he returned from the war, unable to reconcile the broken, haunted man he had become with the idealistic lawyer she had married. "You're not the same person," she had said in her farewell letter. "The war took my husband and left a stranger in his place." She had been right, of course. The Thomas Callahan who had enlisted as a captain in the Union Army had died somewhere between Shiloh and Gettysburg, replaced by a harder man who understood that sometimes violence was the only language that evil understood. Now, watching his companions prepare for what might be their final battle, Tom felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging. These damaged, unlikely people had become his family, bound together not by blood or law but by the shared understanding that some things were worth dying for. On the 3rd night after their rescue, as they sat around the cabin's fireplace planning their strategy, Rebecca posed the question that had been haunting them all. What happens if we actually survive this? What happens after Blackwood is dead? It was Ezekiel who answered first. "I came west looking for land where a black man could make an honest living without fear. Maybe this could be that place. My people need somewhere safe to raise their children," Sarah added. "Somewhere the old ways can live alongside the new." Jacob nodded slowly. "In the old country, I was nothing, just another peasant working land that belonged to someone else. Here, maybe we can build something different." "A school," Rebecca said quietly. "I still want to build a school where children can learn that the color of their skin or the place they were born doesn't determine their worth." Miguel was the last to speak, his weathered face serious in the firelight. "My family has worked this land for 3 generations. We were here before the Americans, before the Spanish, back when it belonged only to the wind and the buffalo. Maybe it's time for all of us to belong to it together." Tom looked around at their faces, seeing hope warring with pragmatism in their eyes. "Then we'd better make sure we live long enough to build it," he said simply. The attack came at dawn on the 4th day, just as Tom had expected. His years of military experience had taught him that most assaults occurred during the transition periods when defenders were most likely to be distracted or off guard. Sarah Crowfeather's warning came in the form of an owl call, the signal they had agreed upon for approaching danger. From her concealed position on the ridge above the cabin, she had spotted the dust cloud raised by Blackwood's approaching army long before they came within sight. 43 men, Tom counted as he studied the approaching force through Samuel's telescope. More than we hoped for, fewer than they need to guarantee victory. Judge Mordecai Blackwood rode at the head of his column, a figure that seemed to embody everything corrupt about frontier justice. Tall and lean, with silver hair and a perfectly groomed beard, he wore the black robes of his office like armor. His pale eyes held no trace of human warmth, only the calculating coldness of a predator who had never known defeat. Beside him rode Sheriff Jeremiah Colt, a man whose reputation for cruelty had made him feared throughout the territory. Unlike his employer's refined appearance, Colt was a creature of pure violence, scarred, brutal, and completely lacking in mercy. The rest of Blackwood's force consisted of hired killers, corrupt lawmen, and the kind of human predators who thrived in the lawless spaces between civilization. They spread out in a loose semicircle around the cabin, their confidence evident in their casual postures and mocking laughter. Thomas Callahan. Blackwood's voice carried clearly across the valley, refined and cultured despite the circumstances. I understand you've been harboring fugitives from justice. Surrender them now, and I might allow you to live long enough to stand trial. Tom stepped onto the cabin's front porch, his Winchester rifle held casually across his chest. The only fugitive from justice I see is the man wearing those stolen robes, he called back. But I'm sure the territorial authorities will be very interested in what I have to tell them. Blackwood's laugh was like ice cracking. The territorial authorities take their guidance from me, Mr. Callahan. I am the law in this region, and the law has found your friends guilty of murder, theft, and conspiracy against the territorial government. Funny thing about the law, Tom replied, his voice carrying the hard edge of absolute conviction. It only works when good people are willing to enforce it. The judge's expression darkened. You have 1 minute to reconsider your position. After that, I'll let Sheriff Colt and his men express their displeasure in more direct terms. Tom raised his rifle, the barrel gleaming in the morning sunlight. I've given you my answer, Blackwood. Now let me give you some advice. Take your hired killers and ride away. This isn't your land, and it never will be. For a moment, the valley fell silent except for the whisper of wind through the pines and the nervous snorting of horses. Then Blackwood raised his hand, and all hell broke loose. The initial volley came from 3 directions simultaneously, a carefully coordinated assault designed to overwhelm the defenders through sheer volume of fire. Bullets shattered windows, splintered logs, and filled the air with deadly lead. But Tom and his companions were ready. Jacob's carefully prepared defenses channeled the attackers into predetermined zones where concentrated fire could be brought to bear. The German immigrant himself had positioned himself in the cabin's loft with Samuel's .50 caliber Sharps rifle, picking off targets with the methodical precision of a master craftsman. Rebecca had claimed the eastern window as her domain, wielding a Spencer repeating rifle with deadly accuracy. Her teacher's eye for detail served her well in combat, allowing her to spot targets that others might miss and predict movement patterns with uncanny precision. Miguel fought from the kitchen, using a double-barreled shotgun to devastating effect whenever attackers came within close range. His knowledge of local tactics and terrain gave him an almost supernatural ability to anticipate where threats would emerge. Ezekiel had constructed a series of explosive surprises around the cabin's perimeter, carefully timed charges that detonated just as groups of attackers moved into position. The psychological effect was as important as the physical damage. Blackwood's men began to realize that their supposed easy victory was turning into a nightmare. Tom himself moved constantly throughout the cabin, coordinating their defense while engaging targets of opportunity with his Winchester. His military training served him well, allowing him to maintain situational awareness even in the chaos of combat. The battle raged for 3 hours, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. Blackwood's superior numbers allowed him to maintain constant pressure, but the cabin's defenses and the defenders' superior marksmanship prevented any breakthrough attempts. As the morning wore on, frustration began to show among the attackers. Several of Blackwood's hired guns had been killed or wounded, and the rest were beginning to question whether any amount of money was worth facing such determined resistance. It was Sarah Crowfeather who turned the tide of battle. Moving like a ghost through the surrounding forest, she had positioned herself behind Blackwood's main force with a captured rifle and unlimited patience. When Sheriff Colt attempted to lead a flanking maneuver around the cabin's northern side, she was waiting. Her first shot took Colt in the chest, spinning him from his saddle to crash heavily to the ground. The second dropped his lieutenant, a notorious killer named Black Jack Morrison. The third scattered the remaining members of the flanking force, who suddenly found themselves caught in a crossfire they hadn't expected. Seeing his carefully planned assault dissolving into chaos, Judge Blackwood made the mistake that would cost him everything. In his fury and frustration, he abandoned his usual calculated approach and ordered a direct frontal assault on the cabin. 20 men charged across the open ground between the tree line and the cabin, their rebel yells echoing off the valley walls. They ran directly into Jacob's carefully prepared killing field, where hidden pit traps, razor-sharp stakes, and Ezekiel's explosives turned their brave charge into a massacre. Only 6 men reached the cabin's walls, and they found themselves facing point-blank fire from defenders who had been conserving ammunition for precisely this moment. The assault collapsed in minutes, leaving the valley floor littered with bodies and the survivors fleeing back to whatever cover they could find. Judge Blackwood sat his horse at the edge of the clearing, his refined composure finally cracking as he surveyed the wreckage of his reputation. For 5 years, he had ruled through fear and intimidation, crushing anyone who dared oppose him. Now, a handful of outcasts had not only defied him but handed him a humiliating defeat. "This isn't over, Callahan," he screamed, his cultured voice breaking with rage. "I have friends in Washington, connections you can't imagine. I'll see you all hang for this." Tom stepped back onto the porch, smoke still rising from his Winchester's barrel. "You're right about one thing, Blackwood," he called out. "This isn't over. But when it is, you'll be the one facing the gallows." As the surviving attackers retreated toward town, Tom and his companions began the grim task of tending their wounded and assessing the damage. They had won this battle, but all of them understood that it was only the first engagement in a war that would determine the future of the entire territory. In the aftermath of their victory, Tom and his companions found themselves facing a dilemma that no amount of military training had prepared them to handle. They had defeated Blackwood's assault, but the judge still controlled the territorial legal system. Within hours, wanted posters bearing their names and descriptions would be circulating throughout Colorado territory, branding them as murderers and outlaws. "We need to take this fight to them," Rebecca argued as they gathered around the dining table that had become their war room. "Sitting here waiting for the next attack just gives Blackwood time to bring in more men and resources." Ezekiel nodded grimly. "She's right. Every day we wait is another day for him to consolidate his power and paint us as the criminals. We need to strike while the initiative is still ours." But it was Sarah Crowfeather who proposed the strategy that would ultimately decide their fate. Blackwood's power comes from fear and the belief that he cannot be defeated. What if we took that belief away from him? Over the next week, they implemented a campaign of psychological warfare that would have impressed Tom's former commanders in the Union Army. Using Sarah's knowledge of wilderness tactics and guerrilla warfare, they began systematically dismantling Blackwood's network of corruption and intimidation. Their first target was the Broken Wheel Saloon in nearby Redemption Creek, a gathering place for Blackwood's hired guns and the unofficial headquarters for his criminal operations. Jacob's expertise with explosives proved invaluable as they prepared a series of charges designed to destroy the building while minimizing casualties to innocent bystanders. The attack came at midnight on a Tuesday, when the saloon was closed except for a poker game involving several of Blackwood's most notorious enforcers. Ezekiel's precisely placed charges brought down the building's roof and walls in a thunderous collapse that could be heard for miles, sending a clear message that nowhere was safe for those who served the corrupt judge. Their second operation targeted the stage route between Redemption Creek and Denver, where Blackwood's men routinely robbed and murdered travelers while wearing sheriff's badges. Miguel's knowledge of the local terrain allowed them to set up an ambush that captured an entire patrol of corrupt lawmen, complete with their stolen loot and forged documents. Rather than killing their prisoners, Tom made a decision that reflected his own evolution from bitter veteran to reluctant leader. They stripped the corrupt lawmen of their weapons and badges, then sent them walking back to town in their underwear, carrying a message for their employer. "Tell Blackwood that the people of this territory have found their voice," Tom instructed the humiliated deputies. "Tell him that his reign of terror is ending, one corrupt official at a time." The psychological impact of these operations spread throughout the territory like wildfire. For the first time in years, people began to believe that resistance to Blackwood's tyranny was not only possible but inevitable. Farmers who had been afraid to leave their homes began organizing militia companies. Merchants who had paid protection money to corrupt officials started refusing to cooperate with Blackwood's tax collectors. But their most important victory came from an unexpected source. Dr. Eleanor Hayes, the territory's only licensed physician, had been secretly documenting Blackwood's crimes for months, collecting evidence of murders disguised as medical emergencies and maintaining detailed records of victims who had been treated for torture and abuse. When word of Tom's resistance reached her, Dr. Hayes made the dangerous journey to Samuel's cabin under cover of darkness, carrying with her a leather satchel filled with evidence that could destroy Blackwood's entire operation. "I took an oath to do no harm," she explained as she spread her documentation across the table. "For too long, I've been silent while that monster destroyed innocent lives. If you're truly planning to bring him to justice, you'll need proof that even his corrupt friends in the territorial government can't ignore." The evidence was damning beyond Tom's wildest hopes. Dr. Hayes had meticulously documented every suspicious death in the territory for the past 3 years, complete with witness statements, medical examinations, and photographic evidence. She had also been secretly treating victims of Blackwood's torture sessions, building an unshakable case for systematic brutality and murder. "There's more," Dr. Hayes continued, producing a second bundle of documents. "I've been in correspondence with officials in Washington, people who are growing concerned about the territory's reputation for lawlessness. They're planning to send federal investigators, but Blackwood has been bribing territorial officials to intercept and suppress their reports." Tom studied the documents with growing excitement. For the first time since arriving in Colorado territory, he could see a path to victory that didn't require constant bloodshed and guerrilla warfare. "We need to get this evidence to Washington directly," he said finally. "Bypass the territorial government entirely and take our case to people who can't be bought or intimidated." It was Rebecca who suggested their ultimate strategy. "What if we didn't just send the evidence to Washington? What if we brought Washington here?" Over the next several days, they crafted a plan that was audacious in its simplicity and devastating in its implications. Using Dr. Hayes' contacts and Rebecca's skills as a writer, they prepared a comprehensive report on Blackwood's reign of terror, complete with sworn affidavits from victims, photographic evidence of crimes, and detailed financial records showing the systematic theft of territorial resources. But rather than simply mailing this report to federal authorities, they decided to personally deliver it to the most powerful man in the American government, President Ulysses S. Grant himself. Grant was a soldier before he was a politician, Tom explained as they finalized their preparations. He understands that sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. More importantly, he has the power to bypass every corrupt official between here and Washington. The journey to the nation's capital would be dangerous, requiring them to travel through territory controlled by Blackwood's allies and associates. But it also represented their best, perhaps only, chance to achieve the kind of justice that couldn't be bought, corrupted, or intimidated. As they prepared to leave Samuel's cabin, Tom found himself reflecting on the strange bonds that had formed between such unlikely companions. A former Union officer, a Mexican rancher, a schoolteacher from New England, a German immigrant, a Lakota woman, and a freed slave. They represented everything that was both promising and troubling about America's western expansion. "Whatever happens in Washington," he told them as they prepared to depart, "what we've built here matters. You've shown me that the frontier doesn't have to be a place where might makes right. It can be where people of different backgrounds come together to create something better." Rebecca smiled, her hand resting on the saddlebags containing their precious evidence. Then let's go make sure the rest of the country understands that too. The journey to Washington, D.C. took 3 weeks of hard riding through some of the most dangerous territory in the American West. Tom had divided their group into pairs, with each couple taking different routes to maximize their chances that at least one copy of their evidence would reach its destination. Tom and Sarah traveled the northern route through Wyoming territory, using her knowledge of Native American trails to avoid the main roads where Blackwood's influence was strongest. Rebecca and Miguel took the central path through Kansas and Missouri, while Ezekiel and Jacob chose the southern route through New Mexico territory and Texas. The precautions proved necessary. On the second day of their journey, Tom and Sarah encountered a group of men who claimed to be federal marshals but whose questions and behavior suggested they were actually bounty hunters working for Blackwood. Only Sarah's quick thinking and intimate knowledge of the terrain allowed them to escape what would have been certain capture or death. "He has people watching every major trail and railway station," Sarah observed as they made camp in a hidden canyon that night. "This Judge Blackwood, he has built an empire of fear that reaches far beyond one territory." Tom nodded grimly. During their weeks of warfare, he had begun to understand that Blackwood's operation was more sophisticated and far-reaching than any of them had initially realized. This wasn't just a local corruption problem. It was part of a network of criminal enterprises that stretched from the Mexican border to the Canadian frontier. Their breakthrough came in the unlikely setting of a small trading post near Fort Laramie, where they encountered a grizzled Army scout named Jeremiah "Scout" Patterson. The old mountain man recognized Tom's military bearing immediately and, after learning of their mission, offered information that changed everything. "I know about your Judge Blackwood," Patterson said over a shared bottle of whiskey. "Been tracking his operations for the better part of 2 years now, ever since his boys murdered my partner for refusing to falsify a survey report." Patterson's information was staggering in its scope. Blackwood's criminal network included corrupt territorial governors in at least 4 territories, federal judges who could be bought for the right price, and even connections to certain members of Congress who profited from the systematic theft of Native American lands and mineral rights. "The thing is," Patterson continued, "there's folks in Washington who've been trying to break this thing wide open for months. They just ain't had the kind of evidence that would stand up in court. What you're carrying could be the key to bringing down the whole rotten structure." Armed with Patterson's intelligence about safe routes and trustworthy contacts, Tom and Sarah made better time toward their destination. But their most important discovery came from an unexpected source: a telegram waiting for them at Fort Kearny, sent by Rebecca using a code they had agreed upon before separating. "Harvest ready, stop Washington expecting delivery, stop friends waiting, stop." The message meant that Rebecca and Miguel had successfully reached the capital and made contact with sympathetic federal officials. More importantly, it indicated that their evidence was being taken seriously by people with the power to act on it. When Tom and Sarah finally reached Washington in early November, they found a city in the midst of political upheaval. President Grant was facing criticism from multiple quarters: radical Republicans who thought his Reconstruction policies were too lenient, Democrats who opposed his civil rights initiatives, and reformers who demanded action against the rampant corruption that plagued the post-war federal bureaucracy. Their first meeting was with General Philip Sheridan, Grant's old war companion and one of the few men in Washington whose integrity was beyond question. Sheridan listened to their story with the focused attention of a military strategist, asking pointed questions about Blackwood's operations and the evidence they had gathered. "What you're describing isn't just territorial corruption," Sheridan said after reviewing their documents. "This is systematic criminal conspiracy designed to subvert federal authority in the Western Territories. If even half of what you've documented is accurate, it represents a direct threat to the expansion of lawful government beyond the Mississippi River." The general's endorsement opened doors that would have remained closed to a group of frontier refugees. Within days, Tom found himself sitting in the office of Attorney General Amos Ackerman, a Georgia lawyer who had earned Grant's respect through his vigorous prosecution of the Ku Klux Klan in the post-war South. Ackerman studied their evidence with the careful attention of a prosecutor building a capital case. "Judge Blackwood has been very clever," he observed after hours of detailed review. He's operated within the technical boundaries of territorial law while systematically perverting its intent. But what you've brought me changes everything. The evidence package included not only Dr. Hayes' medical documentation and the sworn affidavits of victims but also financial records that Jacob had discovered during their raid on the Broken Wheel Saloon. These documents showed a complex money laundering operation that funneled stolen territorial resources into legitimate businesses in Denver, Kansas City, and even New York. This isn't just about Colorado territory, Ackerman continued. Blackwood and his associates have been using territorial corruption as a testing ground for a much larger criminal enterprise. If we don't stop them here, this model could spread throughout the entire western frontier. President Grant himself received Tom and his companions in the White House on a cold December morning, less than a month after their arrival in Washington. The meeting had been arranged by General Sheridan, who had convinced the president that the situation in Colorado territory represented both a crisis and an opportunity. Grant listened to their story with the same methodical attention he had once brought to military campaigns, occasionally asking questions or requesting clarification on specific points. When they finished, he sat in silence for several minutes, his weathered features reflecting the weight of command. "Gentlemen, ladies," he said finally, "what you've accomplished represents the finest traditions of American citizenship. You've risked your lives to defend the principles of justice and law that make our republic possible." The president's decision was swift and decisive. Within a week, a special federal task force was organized under the joint authority of the Attorney General and the War Department. Its mission was to travel to Colorado territory with sufficient legal authority and military support to arrest Judge Blackwood and dismantle his entire criminal network. But Grant's most important decision was to appoint Tom Callahan as the task force's civilian coordinator, with full authority to coordinate between federal marshals, military personnel, and local law enforcement officials who could be trusted. "You've seen this corruption from the ground up," Grant explained as he offered Tom the temporary commission. "You understand how it operates and who can be trusted to help clean it up. More importantly, you've proven that you're willing to put your life on the line for justice." Tom accepted the appointment with a mixture of pride and trepidation. He had come west seeking personal redemption and found himself carrying the responsibility for bringing justice to an entire territory. But as he looked at his companions, these remarkable people who had become his family, he knew that they had the strength to see their mission through to its conclusion. The federal task force that returned to Colorado territory in January 1872 was unlike anything the frontier had ever seen. Led by U.S. Marshal James Wild Bill Hickok and supported by 2 companies of cavalry from the 7th Infantry Regiment, it represented the full authority of the federal government backed by overwhelming force. Tom rode at the head of the civilian contingent, his temporary federal commission giving him authority that even territorial officials couldn't ignore. Beside him rode his 5 companions, each now carrying deputy marshal badges that symbolized their transformation from desperate refugees to agents of justice. The news of their approach spread through Colorado territory like wildfire. Judge Blackwood's network of informants kept him well informed about the federal task force's progress, but for the first time in his criminal career, he found himself facing an opponent he couldn't bribe, intimidate, or eliminate through violence. 40 federal marshals, 200 soldiers, and legal authority that comes directly from President Grant himself, Sheriff Colt reported as he paced nervously in Blackwood's private chambers. "We can't fight this, Judge. Maybe it's time to cut our losses and run." But Judge Mordecai Blackwood had not built his empire by running from challenges. His pale eyes reflected the calculating coldness that had made him feared throughout the territory as he studied the reports of the approaching federal force. "Running would be an admission of guilt," he said quietly. "And guilt implies that we've done something wrong. No, Sheriff, we're going to face this challenge head-on, using the same methods that have served us so well in the past." Blackwood's strategy was characteristically clever and ruthless. Rather than attempting to fight the federal task force directly, he planned to discredit their mission by portraying Tom and his companions as dangerous criminals who had manipulated federal authorities through lies and forged evidence. Working through his network of corrupt officials and intimidated witnesses, Blackwood began constructing an alternative narrative that painted the Redemption Creek incident as a terrorist attack by radical elements opposed to lawful territorial government. He produced witness statements claiming that Tom's group had murdered innocent lawmen and civilians, destroyed legitimate businesses, and terrorized peaceful citizens. More dangerously, he used his connections in Denver to file federal charges against Tom and his companions, accusing them of mail fraud, conspiracy against the United States government, and incitement to rebellion. The charges were filed through corrupt federal prosecutors who owed their positions to Blackwood's political influence, creating a legal maze that could tie up the task force for months while evidence disappeared and witnesses were eliminated. Tom learned of Blackwood's counterattack through a coded message from Dr. Eleanor Hayes, who had remained in Colorado Territory to coordinate with sympathetic locals. Her intelligence network had uncovered the judge's plan to arrest the federal task force on trumped-up charges the moment they entered territorial jurisdiction. "He's trying to turn our own legal system against us," Tom explained to Marshal Hickok as they made camp 50 miles from Redemption Creek. "If we ride into town following standard procedures, we'll be walking into a trap that could neutralize our entire mission." Hickok studied the intelligence reports with the focused attention of a professional lawman who had survived decades on the frontier through careful preparation and quick thinking. "What do you recommend, Callahan?" Tom spread out a detailed map of Redemption Creek and its surrounding territory, pointing to key locations that his companions had scouted during their guerrilla campaign. "We don't give him the chance to spring his trap. We hit multiple targets simultaneously, using speed and surprise to prevent him from coordinating a response." The plan they developed was complex and risky, requiring precise timing and flawless execution. Rather than approaching Redemption Creek as a single force, they would divide into 5 separate groups, each targeting a different component of Blackwood's criminal network. Marshal Hickok would lead the main force directly to the courthouse, where Blackwood maintained his official headquarters and kept many of his most incriminating records. Their mission was to serve federal arrest warrants and seize evidence before it could be destroyed or hidden. Tom and Sarah would target Blackwood's private residence, a fortified mansion on the outskirts of town where the judge kept his personal files and conducted his most sensitive criminal business. Their goal was to capture Blackwood himself and prevent his escape. Rebecca and Miguel were assigned to secure the town's bank and telegraph office, both of which served as crucial components of Blackwood's money laundering operations. By controlling communications and financial records, they could prevent the judge's associates from warning other members of the criminal network. Ezekiel and Jacob would lead a company of soldiers to surround the sheriff's office and jail, where corrupt lawmen might attempt to destroy evidence or harm prisoners who could testify against Blackwood's organization. Their mission was to secure any surviving witnesses and prevent the elimination of crucial testimony. The 5th group, consisting of federal agents and cavalry troopers, would establish checkpoints on all roads leading out of Redemption Creek, preventing Blackwood's associates from escaping with stolen assets or crucial evidence. The operation began at dawn on February 14, 1872, exactly 1 year after Tom had first arrived in Colorado Territory to claim his brother's inheritance. As the sun rose over the Rocky Mountains, 5 separate forces converged on Redemption Creek with the precision of a military campaign. Tom and Sarah approached Blackwood's mansion through the pine forest that surrounded the property, using skills they had developed during their guerrilla warfare campaign. The judge's home was indeed fortified, with high walls, armed guards, and clear fields of fire that would have made a direct assault costly and time-consuming. But Sarah's knowledge of traditional warfare provided an alternative approach. Using techniques her father had learned fighting alongside Crazy Horse, she identified a weakness in the mansion's defenses, a drainage culvert that provided access to the property's interior without exposing them to the guards' line of sight. Inside the mansion, they found evidence that exceeded their wildest expectations. Blackwood had maintained meticulous records of his criminal activities, apparently believing that his position and influence made him untouchable by federal authorities. His personal safe contained contracts for the purchase of territorial officials, detailed plans for the systematic theft of Native American lands, and correspondence with criminal associates throughout the Western Territories. Most importantly, they discovered a leather-bound ledger that contained the financial records of Blackwood's entire operation. The ledger showed how stolen territorial resources had been converted into legitimate investments, creating a criminal empire that stretched from Colorado to New York and involved some of the most prominent names in American business and politics. But their most significant discovery was Judge Blackwood himself, found in his private study attempting to burn crucial documents in the fireplace. The man who had terrorized Colorado territory for 5 years was revealed in his moment of defeat as nothing more than a frightened criminal facing the consequences of his crimes. "Thomas Callahan," Blackwood said as Tom entered the study with his revolver drawn. "I should have killed you the day you arrived in my territory." "Your territory?" Tom replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had finally found his purpose. "This land belongs to the people who live and work on it, not to criminals who steal it through murder and corruption." The arrest of Judge Mordecai Blackwood sent shockwaves throughout the criminal network he had spent years constructing. Within hours, similar operations were taking place in Denver, Kansas City, and other cities where his associates had believed themselves safe from federal prosecution. Sheriff Jeremiah Colt attempted to resist arrest, barricading himself in the jail with several of his corrupt deputies. But Ezekiel's expertise with explosives made short work of their defenses, while Jacob's tactical skills ensured that the assault was completed with minimal casualties. The evidence recovered from these simultaneous operations provided federal prosecutors with enough material to indict more than 200 individuals on charges ranging from murder and theft to conspiracy against the United States government. The criminal network that had seemed untouchable just months earlier collapsed like a house of cards once its foundation was removed. But perhaps the most significant victory was achieved by Rebecca and Miguel at the town's bank and telegraph office. The financial records they secured provided crucial evidence of how Blackwood's operation had been financed and how stolen resources had been laundered through legitimate businesses. More importantly, they discovered evidence of similar criminal networks operating in other Western territories, using the same methods that had made Blackwood so successful in Colorado. This intelligence would prove invaluable in federal efforts to prevent the spread of territorial corruption throughout the American frontier. As the sun set on that historic day, Tom found himself standing in the courthouse where Judge Blackwood had dispensed his perverted version of justice for so many years. The building would soon be cleansed of corruption and restored to its proper purpose as a temple of law and order. Looking around at his companions, these remarkable people who had risked everything to fight for justice, Tom realized that they had accomplished something far more significant than the arrest of a single criminal. They had proven that ordinary citizens, working together with courage and determination, could challenge even the most powerful forms of corruption and evil. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked as they watched federal marshals loading the last of the seized evidence onto wagons bound for Denver and Washington. Tom smiled, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded him since the end of the Civil War. "Now we build something better. We take the land that Samuel left me and create the kind of community that people like Blackwood tried to prevent, a place where justice isn't for sale and everyone has the chance to build a better life." 6 months after the fall of Judge Blackwood's criminal empire, the territory that had once lived in fear was experiencing a transformation that amazed even its most optimistic residents. Federal prosecutors, working with the evidence provided by Tom and his companions, had successfully prosecuted more than 150 individuals for crimes ranging from murder to mail fraud. Judge Blackwood himself received a sentence of life imprisonment at the federal penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas, where he would spend his remaining years contemplating the consequences of his reign of terror. Sheriff Jeremiah Colt and his most brutal deputies were hanged for their crimes, while lesser criminals received prison sentences that effectively dismantled the network of corruption that had plagued the territory for years. But the most important changes were happening at the grassroots level, in communities throughout Colorado territory where honest citizens were finally free to build the kind of society they had always dreamed of creating. The land around Samuel's cabin had become the nucleus of a remarkable experiment in frontier democracy. Tom had used his legal expertise and federal connections to establish clear property rights for all of his companions, creating a community where Mexican ranchers, German immigrants, freed slaves, and Native Americans could work together as equals. Rebecca had finally achieved her dream of building a school, but it was far more ambitious than anything she had originally envisioned. The Redemption Creek Academy welcomed children of all backgrounds and races, teaching not only traditional subjects like reading and mathematics but also practical skills like farming, metalworking, and frontier survival. More importantly, the school served as a symbol of the new Colorado Territory's commitment to education and equality. Children who would have been forbidden to attend the same institution under Blackwood's regime now played and learned together, their friendship pointing toward a future where America's diversity would be a source of strength rather than division. Miguel Santos had used his knowledge of ranching and his connections throughout the Hispanic community to establish a cooperative cattle operation that gave small farmers the economic leverage they needed to compete with larger enterprises. His success had inspired similar cooperatives throughout the territory, creating a network of mutual support that strengthened entire communities. Jacob Mueller's craftsmanship had evolved from defensive warfare to peaceful construction. His workshop had become a training center where young people learned the skills they needed to build homes, bridges, and the infrastructure that growing communities required. His commitment to excellence and his willingness to share knowledge had made him one of the most respected citizens in the new Redemption Creek. Sarah Crowfeather had achieved something that few thought possible in post-Civil War America. She had negotiated a peace treaty between local Native American tribes and territorial authorities that recognized traditional hunting and fishing rights while establishing clear boundaries for white settlement. Her ability to bridge cultural divides had made her an invaluable mediator in disputes that might otherwise have led to violence. Ezekiel Washington had used his wartime experience and his connections within the African American community to establish a freight and transportation business that served communities throughout the territory. His success as an entrepreneur had opened doors for other freed slaves seeking to build new lives in the West, while his commitment to fair dealing had earned him respect across racial lines. Dr. Eleanor Hayes had expanded her medical practice to include a small hospital that served the entire region, training nurses and midwives who could provide basic health care to isolated communities. Her documentation of Blackwood's crimes had made her a hero throughout the territory, but her greatest satisfaction came from healing rather than exposing wounds. Tom himself had found a role that combined his legal expertise with his hard-earned understanding of frontier realities. Appointed as the territory's first federal magistrate, he traveled throughout Colorado establishing courts, training local officials, and ensuring that the rule of law was applied fairly regardless of a person's race, religion, or economic status. But perhaps his most important role was as the unofficial coordinator of what people throughout the territory had begun calling the Redemption Creek Model, an approach to community building that emphasized cooperation, mutual respect, and shared prosperity. The model was attracting attention far beyond Colorado territory. Delegations of political leaders, social reformers, and journalists traveled from as far away as New York and California to study how such diverse groups of people could work together successfully in what many considered the most challenging environment in America. Their success hadn't come without challenges. Some white settlers resented sharing political and economic power with people they considered their social inferiors. Certain Native American tribes remained suspicious of any cooperation with white authorities, regardless of how well-intentioned. Business interests in Denver and other established cities complained that the Redemption Creek model was disrupting traditional economic relationships. But these challenges served only to strengthen the bonds between Tom's original companions and the hundreds of families who had joined their experiment in frontier democracy. They had learned that building a just society required constant vigilance and unwavering commitment to the principles that had brought them together. On the second anniversary of their victory over Judge Blackwood, the community organized a celebration that brought together more than 1,000 people from throughout Colorado territory. The festival featured music, dancing, food, and storytelling that reflected the rich cultural diversity of the American frontier. As Tom stood on the porch of the cabin where their struggle had begun, watching children of different races playing together while their parents shared food and conversation, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment that went far beyond personal satisfaction. "You know what the most amazing thing is?" Rebecca said as she joined him on the porch, her teacher's eye taking in the scene before them. These children don't see the differences that divide their parents' generation. To them, friendship and cooperation are natural, not revolutionary. Tom nodded, thinking about how much his own understanding had evolved since that terrible morning when he had first cut the ropes that bound his companions. Maybe that's how real change happens, he said. Not through dramatic battles or political declarations, but through ordinary people deciding to treat each other with dignity and respect. Sarah Crowfeather approached them, carrying her infant daughter, the first child born in the new Redemption Creek whose heritage included both Native American and European ancestry. My father always said that the strongest tribe is the one that welcomes strangers and makes them family, she said. I think he would be proud of what we've built here. As the celebration continued into the night, Tom found himself thinking about the letter he had received that morning from President Grant's office. The president was planning to visit Colorado Territory later that year, and he specifically wanted to see the Redemption Creek community that had become a symbol of successful frontier integration. More importantly, federal officials were considering adopting the Redemption Creek model as a template for territorial development throughout the American West. If successful, their small experiment could influence how an entire continent was settled and governed. It's a big responsibility, Miguel observed as Tom shared the news with his closest friends. People will be watching to see if what we've built here can work anywhere else. Then we'd better make sure it continues to work here, Ezekiel replied with a smile that reflected both pride and determination. We've proven that people of different backgrounds can build something better together than any of us could create alone. Now we need to show that such communities can last. Jacob raised his glass in a toast that captured the spirit of their shared enterprise. To Samuel Callahan, who brought us together through his legacy. To the friends who chose to stand together when standing alone would have been easier. And to the future we're building for children who will know freedom as their birthright rather than their aspiration. As they drank to Jacob's toast, Tom felt the presence of his brother Samuel in the mountain wind that whispered through the valley. The inheritance he had come west to claim had proven to be far more valuable than any piece of land or simple cabin. He had inherited a family, a community, and a chance to help shape the future of a nation still struggling to live up to its founding ideals. In the flickering firelight of their celebration, surrounded by friends who had become family and children who represented hope for tomorrow, Tom Callahan finally understood what his brother had really left him. It wasn't just land or property, it was the opportunity to prove that America's promise of equality and justice wasn't just an impossible dream but a goal that ordinary people could achieve through courage, determination, and the willingness to treat others as they hoped to be treated themselves. The frontier had tested them all, stripping away illusions and revealing the true character that lay beneath surface differences. They had emerged from that test not as conquerors or victims, but as citizens of a community that pointed toward what America could become if its people had the wisdom to learn from their shared experience. As the stars appeared in the Colorado sky and the celebration gradually wound down, Tom knew that their work was far from finished. Building a just society was not a destination but a journey that required constant effort and unwavering commitment to the principles that had brought them together. But looking around at the faces illuminated by firelight, faces that reflected the beautiful diversity of the American experiment, he felt confident that they had built something strong enough to endure and inspiring enough to spread. The frontier had been their crucible, but what emerged from that testing was not just survival but transformation. They had proven that even in the harshest conditions, people could choose cooperation over competition, justice over convenience, and hope over fear. In the end, that choice, made by ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, was perhaps the greatest victory of all. 15 years after the fall of Judge Blackwood's criminal empire, a middle-aged journalist named William "Bill" Henderson rode into what had once been called Redemption Creek but was now known throughout the American West as Liberty Valley. Henderson had been commissioned by Harper's Weekly to write a feature article about the community that had become a symbol of successful frontier integration and democratic cooperation. What he found exceeded even the glowing reports he had read in Eastern newspapers and government documents. The small settlement that had begun around Samuel Callahan's cabin had grown into a prosperous town of nearly 3,000 residents representing dozens of different ethnic, racial, and religious backgrounds. The main street featured businesses owned by Mexican ranchers, German craftsmen, African American entrepreneurs, and Native American traders, all working together in a spirit of mutual respect and shared prosperity. The town's bank was run by a partnership that included representatives from each major community group, ensuring that credit and investment opportunities were available to everyone regardless of their background. The Redemption Creek Academy had evolved into a full university, attracting students from throughout the American West who wanted to study everything from engineering and medicine to literature and law. The school's integrated student body and faculty had produced graduates who were making their mark in politics, business, and the professions from California to New York. But perhaps most impressive was the town's system of democratic governance, which had become a model for communities throughout the Western territories. The town council included elected representatives from every major community group, with decisions made through consensus and compromise rather than the winner-take-all politics that dominated most American cities. Henderson's first interview was with Thomas Callahan, now in his 60s but still serving as the region's federal magistrate. Tom had aged well, his silver hair and lined face reflecting wisdom earned through years of service to his community and his country. People often ask me what made our experiment successful when so many other attempts at racial integration have failed, Tom told Henderson as they sat on the porch of the cabin where it all began. I think the answer is simple. We were forced to depend on each other for survival before we had time to develop the prejudices that usually divide people. You mean the crisis with Judge Blackwood? Henderson asked. That was part of it, Tom replied. But the real crisis was deeper than one corrupt official. We were all refugees in our own ways, people who had been driven from our homes or our previous lives by forces beyond our control. That shared experience of displacement and vulnerability created bonds that transcended the superficial differences that divide people in more settled communities. Henderson's next interview was with Rebecca Morrison, now the president of the Liberty Valley University and one of the most respected educators in the American West. Despite her administrative responsibilities, she still taught classes and maintained close relationships with students from all backgrounds. The key to our educational philosophy is treating diversity as an asset rather than a problem, she explained as they toured the university campus. When students from different cultural backgrounds work together on projects, they learn not just academic subjects but also the skills they need to succeed in an increasingly complex world. She showed Henderson the university's laboratory where Native American students were working with German immigrants to develop new agricultural techniques, and the workshop where African American craftsmen were teaching traditional woodworking skills to Mexican and Anglo students alike. Knowledge belongs to everyone, Rebecca continued. Our job as educators is to break down the artificial barriers that prevent people from learning from each other. Miguel Santos, now a prosperous cattle rancher and the town's mayor, emphasized the economic benefits of their cooperative approach to development. His ranch employed workers from all ethnic backgrounds, paying equal wages for equal work and providing opportunities for advancement based on merit rather than social connections. When Judge Blackwood controlled this territory, economic opportunity was reserved for his friends and supporters, Miguel told Henderson as they rode through pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. Now, success depends on hard work, intelligence, and the willingness to treat others fairly. That creates prosperity for everyone, not just a privileged few. Jacob Mueller had become the territory's most successful manufacturer, operating workshops that produced everything from farm equipment to furniture. His commitment to quality craftsmanship and fair employment practices had made his products sought after throughout the Western territories. In the old country, I was told that a man's worth was determined by his birth, Jacob explained as he demonstrated the operation of a new steam-powered sawmill. Here, we judge people by what they contribute to the community. That has made all the difference. Sarah Crowfeather had achieved something that many thought impossible in late 19th century America. She had been elected to the territorial legislature as a representative of both Native American tribes and the broader community. Her success in bridging cultural divides had made her a sought-after mediator in disputes throughout the region. My father taught me that the strongest leader is the one who serves others rather than commanding them, she told Henderson during their interview. In this community, leadership means bringing people together rather than dividing them. Ezekiel Washington had built his freight business into one of the largest transportation companies in the territory, employing drivers and support staff from every ethnic group represented in Liberty Valley. His success had inspired dozens of other African American entrepreneurs to start businesses throughout the region. Freedom means more than just the absence of slavery, Ezekiel explained as he showed Henderson his company's headquarters. Real freedom means the opportunity to build something meaningful with your life, regardless of where you started or what obstacles you faced. Dr. Eleanor Hayes, now in her 70s but still practicing medicine, had trained a new generation of healthcare providers who served communities throughout Colorado Territory. Her integrated medical practice and hospital had become a model for providing quality healthcare to diverse populations. Medicine taught me that beneath our surface differences, we're all fundamentally the same, she told Henderson as they visited patients in the hospital. Pain, fear, hope, and love are universal human experiences that transcend race or culture. As Henderson prepared his article, he found himself struggling to capture the essence of what made Liberty Valley different from other frontier communities. On paper, it seemed like any other prosperous western town, but there was something intangible, a spirit of cooperation and mutual respect, that set it apart from anything he had encountered in his years of journalism. His answer came during the town's annual Founders' Day celebration, which commemorated not just the defeat of Judge Blackwood but the ongoing commitment to the principles that had brought the community together. As he watched children of different races playing together while their parents shared food and conversation, Henderson realized that Liberty Valley's greatest achievement wasn't its prosperity or political success. It was the simple fact that diversity had become normal rather than exceptional. The celebration featured speeches by local leaders, but the most moving moment came when Tom Callahan, now using a cane but still commanding in presence, addressed the crowd from the steps of the courthouse. 20 years ago, we came together not by choice but by necessity, Tom said, his voice carrying clearly across the square. We were strangers thrown together by circumstances beyond our control, forced to depend on each other for survival. What we discovered was that our differences weren't obstacles to overcome but strengths to be celebrated. He paused, his eyes taking in the faces of the crowd, faces that reflected the beautiful diversity of the American frontier. We learned that justice isn't something that happens automatically, but something that must be built and maintained by people willing to work together despite their differences. We learned that prosperity isn't a zero-sum game where one person's success requires another's failure, but a shared enterprise where everyone benefits from everyone else's contributions. Tom's voice grew stronger as he continued. Most importantly, we learned that the American dream isn't just about individual freedom and opportunity, it's about creating communities where everyone has the chance to contribute their talents and share in the rewards of collective success. As the crowd applauded, Henderson found the theme for his article. Liberty Valley wasn't successful because it had solved America's racial and cultural divisions. It was successful because it had found a way to transform those divisions into sources of strength and creativity. In his final article, Henderson wrote, "In an age when America seems increasingly divided by race, religion, and economic class, Liberty Valley offers proof that such divisions are not inevitable. Here, in this remote corner of Colorado Territory, a group of unlikely companions has built something that points toward what America could become if its citizens had the wisdom to learn from their example." The article, published in Harper's Weekly in 1887, brought national attention to Liberty Valley and the Redemption Creek model of community development. Delegations of political leaders, social reformers, and educators traveled from around the world to study how such a diverse community had achieved such remarkable success. But for the residents of Liberty Valley, the greatest satisfaction came not from national recognition but from the knowledge that they had built something lasting, a community that would continue to evolve and grow while maintaining its commitment to the principles of justice, equality, and mutual respect that had brought them together. As Tom Callahan entered his final years, he often reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. He had come west seeking personal redemption and found himself helping to build a community that offered hope for national redemption. The inheritance he had claimed from his brother Samuel had indeed proven more valuable than any mere piece of land, It had given him the chance to participate in the great American experiment of creating a society where all people could pursue happiness regardless of their origins or circumstances. The frontier had tested them all, revealing both the worst and best of human nature. They had chosen to focus on the best, building a community that demonstrated what was possible when people treated each other with dignity and respect. In the end, their greatest victory wasn't the defeat of Judge Blackwood or the establishment of a prosperous town. It was the proof they had offered that America's founding ideals weren't just impossible dreams but achievable goals for those with the courage to pursue them. The legacy they created would outlive them all, inspiring future generations to believe that justice, equality, and freedom weren't just words on paper but principles that ordinary people could implement through determination, cooperation, and the unwavering belief that America's diversity was its greatest strength. In Liberty Valley, the American dream had become American reality, one person, one family, one friendship at a time.